2 decades after the first bombs fell, the Iraq War is no longer just a chapter in history textbooks, but a force that continues to shape governments, economies, and lives around the world. What began as a promise of security and stability instead left behind fractured institutions, shifts in power, and long-lasting economic costs. This presentation will look beyond the battlefield and ask a harder question. How did the Iraq War permanently change the political and economic landscape of the Middle East and the world? And how did the media influence public opinion during the conflict? Hey guys, it's Braden and Kyle, and today we'll be covering the topics and concerns of the Iraq War. Over the past couple of days, we have done some research and discussions about the war, and we have discovered some pretty interesting things. Starting off with the first source that we have gathered information from, which is PBS, which talks about the long-lasting information of the Iraq War. We discovered that this source is striving to be a more neutral source by including interviews in their writing about the war. The interviews that they had discussed how the initial invasion of the Iraq War was justified. They state that the invasion was not justified to some extent for the reasons of invasion not holding up. One of the critical reasons for the invasion was the suspicion of mass weapons of destruction. These allegations never really held up, and PBS believes that the war was more of a stand to prove the United States' power in the world. In the discussion, it is stated that, quote, their final report said that the hunt for those weapons had, quote, gone as far as feasible, and all the headlines ran, no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, end quote. Although the United States did not find any weapons of mass destruction, they had various reasons to believe so. They believed since Saddam, who was the leader of Iraq at the time, had been in war with Iran in the 1980s, Saddam used 101,000 chemical munitions, arguably saving him in the war. They also argued since 1991, when Iraq went to Kuwait, the U.S. expelled him from Kuwait, but he did not go back to Baghdad. Instead, he refused to go back, and the U.S. believed that his refusal to return to Baghdad was a reason that he was in possession of weapons of mass destruction. Even though the United States tried to justify the reasons for the invasion because of the weapons, the public, not just in America, but also around the world, sort of frowned upon the U.S. Social networks started to frame America as a country trying to assert power over the world. The lenses that we used in this source was a political and social lens. The political lens was affected because the invasion of the Iraq affected the global relations of the United States has with other countries. The social lens was used with how the public looked at the United States. The public believed that the United States was trying to assert dominance on the world, and people were scared and feeling like they needed to take action against the U.S. Our second source that we have researched is the Pew Research Center. This source is similar to our last source. They talk about how the war was seen through the political and social lens. Pew Research Center focuses on how public opinion in the United States was shaped by fear after the 9/11 attacks and by beliefs that the Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and connections to terrorism. Instead of talking about military personnel or strategy, this source talks about how the public rallied around the United States for entering the war at first. Later on, the public changed their minds on supporting the United States. The source also discussed how many Americans supported President Bush, who was the president at the time, but shortly after the war had begun, many of his supporters started to lose trust in him. Pew Research is widely considered a reliable source because they are known for being a nonpartisan and data-driven site. They base all of their conclusions on surveys and polling data. They explain how the research is conducted. Based on a political standpoint, Pew does not lean either way, and they stay neutral with public polls and opinions. In the article, they talk about not just how the war affected politics at the same time, but later on and even until the 2020s. They state, quote, the Iraq War was a long and complicated legacy. After the war officially ended, it remained an issue to varying degrees in both the 2012 and 2016 presidential election campaigns. Even in the 2020 campaign, nearly a decade after the war's end, Trump and Joe Biden each portrayed themselves as better able to extricate the nation from what we have called endless wars, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, end quote. This quote shows how impactful the war was to the extent of 20 plus years after it had even occurred. The United States was portrayed as a fear-mongering country because of their decisions to enter this war, with the reason that did not hold up to be true, and this decision has affected the media and the politics in this country to this day.
The Brown University Cost of War Project explained that the Iraq War had major long-term political and economic effects that still impact Iraq today. The project states that the war caused lasting damage to Iraq's political institutions and economy, which weakened the government and increased internal conflict across the country. After Saddam Hussein was removed from power, a power vacuum formed because there was no strong leadership to replace him. This led to sectarian violence between different religious and ethnic groups, increased corruption, and ongoing political instability. These issues made it very difficult for Iraq to build a stable democracy or create a strong and effective government. As a result, Iraq has continued to struggle with security problems and political divisions even years after the war officially ended. Economically, the war caused serious damage to Iraq's infrastructure, including roads, buildings, and essential public services. Oil production, which is Iraq's main source of income, was disrupted, leading to major financial losses for the country. The conflict also caused high unemployment and increased poverty, which made economic recovery slower and more difficult. The project explains that war spending and reconstruction costs place heavy pressure on Iraq's economy, while basic services like healthcare, education, and electricity struggled to recover. Many citizens face poor living conditions, which further slowed the country's development and stability. Although the sources focus mainly on social, political, and economic costs rather than media influence, it showed that the U.S. political decisions and public support helped enable a war that had lasting consequences for Iraq's government stability and economic growth. The quality of the source is very high because it comes from Brown University's Watson Institute, a respected academic research center known for careful data-driven research. The information is presented objectively and supported by evidence rather than opinion, which makes it more reliable. The Brookings Institution article, U.S. Opinion Pre- and Post 9/11, focuses on how public opinion and media influence helped build support for the Iraq War, which later affected Iraq's long-term and political economic situation. The article explains that after the September 11th attacks, Americans experienced a strong sense of unity and increased trust in the government, known as the Rally Round the Flag effect. During this time, many citizens supported the government's actions related to national security, including military intervention. Media coverage played an important role by focusing heavily on national security threats and possible connections between terrorism and Iraq. This showed how the public understood the situation and increased approval for war policies. The source explains that public opinion is strongly influenced by how political leaders and media frame conflicts. In other words, the way information is presented to citizens can shape how they think about major political issues and influence their support for government decisions. Because the media helped shape public perception of Iraq as a threat, public support for the war increased. This support allowed the United States to move forward with military action in Iraq, which later contributed to political instability, economic damage, and long-term challenges within the country. By shaping how Americans viewed the purpose and necessity of the war, the media played an indirect but powerful role in creating the conditions that led to Iraq's ongoing struggles and rebuilding its government and economy. The quality of the source is also strong because Brookings is also a well-known and respected policy research organization that uses data, historical evidence, and political analysis to study public behavior. The article clearly explains public opinion trends and shows how media framing influences citizens, making it useful for understanding the connection between public perception and political action.